I never thought that buying my dream home would turn into an absolute nightmare. When I first stepped into this house, I felt like I had finally made it, my own space, my own rules, my own peace. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. But I had no idea that someone else had already set their eyes on my property, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It all started with an innocent-looking letter, taped right to my front door. At first, I thought it was some neighborhood announcement, maybe an invitation to a community event. But as soon as I read the first few lines, my stomach dropped. Dear homeowner, we are pleased to inform you that your property has been incorporated into the HOA district. As a member, you are now responsible for maintaining community standards and paying monthly fees. Failure to comply will result in penalties, including legal action. What the hell? I never signed up for an HOA. In fact, I specifically bought this house because it was outside of any HOA jurisdiction. No pointless rules, no random fees, no power-hungry board members trying to control my property. And yet, here I was, holding a letter that basically said, "Congratulations. You're now part of an HOA whether you like it or not." At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe they had sent it to the wrong address. So, I did the most logical thing, I called the HOA office listed on the letter. The phone barely rang twice before a sickeningly sweet voice answered. Homeowners Association office, this is Linda speaking. How can I assist you today? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. Yeah, I just got a letter saying my house is now part of the HOA. There must be some mistake. I never agreed to this. Silence. Then a calm but firm reply. Oh, Mr. Reynolds, there's no mistake. Your property was annexed into our HOA as part of our recent community expansion. All new members are required to comply with the rules and pay their dues immediately. I gritted my teeth. You can't just force me into an HOA. I never signed anything. Linda let out a soft, almost patronizing laugh. Oh, Mr. Reynolds, refusing to comply won't make this go away. It would be in your best interest to cooperate. Otherwise, you might find yourself facing penalties. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just about some stupid HOA rules. This was a threat. And I had just realized, I was up against something much, much bigger than I had ever imagined. I wasn't about to let some power-hungry HOA force me into their ridiculous rules. If they thought I was going to roll over and start paying their fees like a good little homeowner, they had picked the wrong guy. I decided to get ahead of the situation and check the county records. If my house had never been under HOA jurisdiction, then legally they had no claim over me. I spent hours digging through property records, zoning laws, and anything else I could find. And just as I suspected, there was nothing linking my house to the HOA. No contracts, no agreements, no clauses in my deed. Armed with this information, I drove straight to their office. I wanted to see the person who had the audacity to claim my property as theirs. The receptionist barely looked up as I approached the front desk. Can I help you? She asked in a tone that made it clear she didn't actually care. I need to speak with someone in charge. Now, I said, dropping the printed records on the desk. She sighed and pressed a button on her phone. A moment later, the office door swung open and in walked him. James Carter, the HOA president. He was exactly what I expected. Middle-aged, wearing an overpriced suit, and radiating the kind of arrogance that only comes from years of unchecked power. He smiled like a man who was used to getting his way. Ah, Mr. Reynolds, he said as if we were old friends. I was wondering when you'd stop by. I slid the paperwork toward him. This says my house was never part of the HOA. You have no legal right to charge me anything. Carter barely glanced at the documents before sliding them back toward me. Things change, he said smoothly. You'll find that our bylaws allow for community expansion. Your house has been annexed. That's illegal, I snapped. He let out a small chuckle. That's a strong word. But let me explain something to you, Mr. Reynolds. The HOA always wins. Homeowners like you, well, they either comply or they leave. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. I walked out of that office, furious but determined. I wasn't going to back down. But when I got home, I realized just how serious they were. A bright orange violation notice was taped to my front door. In bold letters it read, Violation Notice, Failure to Comply with HOA Regulations. Below that was a list of supposed infractions. Lawn not trimmed to HOA standards. Trash bins visible from the street. Unauthorized modifications to property. I clenched my fist. This was pure harassment. And I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. If they thought a few fake violations were going to scare me into compliance, they were dead wrong. But as I would soon realize, the HOA wasn't playing fair. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of loud voices outside. I stepped onto my porch and felt my stomach twist. A small group of people stood at the edge of my driveway. At the center was James Carter, flanked by 2 board members and a clipboard-wielding woman who looked like she lived for paperwork. "Mr. Reynolds," Carter said, flashing that same smug smile. "We're here to conduct an inspection of your property. HOA policy requires all homes to meet community standards." I crossed my arms. "You don't have jurisdiction over my house. This is private property." The clipboard woman spoke up, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "According to the new HOA expansion, your home is now subject to our guidelines. If we find violations, we'll have to issue fines." I clenched my jaw. "You can issue all the fines you want. You don't have the legal right to enforce them." Carter's smile wavered just a little. "We'll see about that," he said before waving his group forward. I had 2 choices, stand my ground or let them walk all over me. So I did what any sane person would do. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I need you all to leave my property," I said, my camera capturing every smug expression and power-hungry glance. Carter's face tightened. "Sir, this isn't necessary." "Actually, it is," I cut him off. "You're trespassing. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." There was a long, tense silence. Then, without another word, Carter turned on his heel and stormed off, his little entourage scurrying after him. I had won this round. But I knew this was far from over. That night, I installed security cameras around my house. If the HOA wanted a fight, I was going to be prepared. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Because the very next morning, I woke up to something much, much worse. I barely got any sleep that night. Even though I had sent Carter and his minions packing, something about the way he had said, "We'll see about that," stuck with me. It wasn't over. And I was right. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab my mail, and my heart nearly stopped. A bright red tow notice was slapped onto my truck's windshield. I ripped it off and read the fine print. "Unauthorized vehicle parked in a non-designated area. Vehicle will be towed within 24 hours unless compliant with HOA parking regulations." My own driveway. They were trying to tow my truck from my own damn driveway. My blood boiled. This wasn't just harassment anymore, this was an all-out attack. Before I could even process my anger, I heard a loud clang from across the street. I turned just in time to see a construction crew unloading metal poles and fencing panels right onto my lawn. "What the hell? Hey!" I shouted, storming toward them. "What do you think you're doing?" One of the workers barely glanced at me. "We're installing a community perimeter fence, sir." "HOA orders?" I spun around and saw him standing at the sidewalk, James Carter. Arms crossed, smirk in place, watching like a man who knew he was untouchable. "This isn't community property," I yelled. "You can't build anything here." Carter smirked. "Actually, under the revised HOA bylaws, this land has been reassigned for the beautification of the neighborhood." I felt my fist clench. "This is my land. I own this house. You can't just take my property." "We can and we have," Carter said smoothly. "You'll find the paperwork in your mailbox." I turned and sprinted to my mailbox. Sure enough, there was another legal-looking document inside. I scanned through it, my pulse hammering. They were trying to claim my front yard under some nonsense community improvement initiative. It was pure, calculated theft. I turned back to the crew and shouted, "Touch one thing on my property, and I'll have you arrested for trespassing." The workers hesitated, looking uncertain. Carter's smirk faltered for just a second. Then, with a dramatic sigh, he said, "You're being unreasonable, Mr. Reynolds. This is a community decision." "No," I shot back. "This is my decision. And I decide that if any of you step foot on my property again, you'll be dealing with the police." The workers glanced at Carter, clearly waiting for direction. He pursed his lips, then finally waved them off. "Fine," he said. "Have it your way. But this is far from over." I should have known that wasn't an empty threat. Because 2 days later, I came home to find a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. And this time, they weren't just coming after my yard. They were coming after my entire house. 2 days passed without any sign of the HOA. No unannounced inspections, no fake violations, just silence. It was almost too quiet. I knew they were up to something, but I had no idea just how bad it would be. Then one evening I came home and saw it. A bright yellow notice plastered across my front door. The bold, capitalized words made my stomach turn. "Final notice, property non-compliant, action required immediately." I ripped it down and scanned the details. Unapproved exterior modifications? What modifications? Failure to submit HOA membership dues? I wasn't even a member. Continued violation of community guidelines? Which ones? At the bottom in bold print was the real bombshell. Failure to comply will result in legal action, including but not limited to property liens, fines, and potential forced compliance measures. They weren't just trying to fine me anymore. They were trying to take my house. A mix of rage and panic set in. I had been fighting this battle for weeks, but now they were escalating to legal warfare. I needed a plan. I rushed inside and called my lawyer. The moment he picked up, I read the notice to him. There was a long pause before he finally sighed. "This isn't new," he said. "I've seen HOAs try this before. They bank on homeowners giving up before things get serious. But they don't have a legal claim to your property, not unless they can prove you signed an agreement." "So what do I do?" I asked. "We fight back," he said firmly. "First, we file a formal dispute with the city. Second, we demand proof of their authority over your property. And third," he paused, "we go public." I frowned. "Public?" "Yes," he said. "HOAs hate bad press. If you expose their illegal tactics, they'll fold faster than you think." It made sense. These people thrived on control and secrecy. If the entire neighborhood found out what they were doing, they'd be in serious trouble. That night I got to work. I gathered every single piece of evidence I had. The original deed proving my home was never in the HOA. All letters and violation notices they had sent me. Video footage of Carter and his goons trespassing on my property. Then I started making calls. First, the local news station. Second, a community lawyer who had experience fighting corrupt HOAs. And third, my neighbors. Because if the HOA thought they could bully me into submission, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. But what I didn't know, the HOA was about to make their boldest move yet. And this time it wasn't just legal threats. They were about to physically take something from me. I knew the HOA was desperate, but I never expected them to take things this far. The next morning, I woke up early, ready to put my plan into action. I was going to war. The documents were prepared, my lawyer was on board, and I had already sent emails to the local news. But when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. Something was missing. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing, or rather what I wasn't seeing. My truck. It was gone. I rushed to my driveway, my heart pounding. No broken glass. No signs of forced entry. It hadn't been stolen, it had been towed. I spotted a neon green sign planted in the grass where my truck had been parked. "This area has been designated a no parking zone per HOA regulations. Unauthorized vehicles have been removed at the owner's expense." They towed my truck from my own driveway. I was seeing red. I whipped out my phone and dialed the towing company listed on the sign. "Yes, we have your vehicle," the woman on the other end said casually. "It was impounded under HOA request. You'll need to pay the fee to get it back." I clenched my jaw. "How much?" She barely hesitated. $750. $750. For my own truck. Taken from my own driveway. I was fuming. But I wasn't about to let them win. I drove straight to the tow lot, paid the ridiculous fee, and got my truck back. But as I pulled out, I knew this was their way of showing me that they could take whatever they wanted. I needed to strike back. Art. When I got home, I turned on my computer and started typing. Post title: "My HOA is illegally trying to take my property, here's the proof." I uploaded every single violation notice, the towing fee receipt, the video of Carter trespassing on my property. I tagged the news stations. I posted it everywhere. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Because within hours my post exploded. Comments poured in. People were furious. Some were neighbors who had been harassed by the HOA too. Others were complete strangers who just wanted to see the HOA burn. The pressure was building. But before I could celebrate, something happened that made my blood run cold. A black SUV pulled up to my house. And out stepped James Carter. But this time he wasn't alone. He had brought the police. I stood frozen on my front porch as James Carter stepped out of the black SUV, his smug expression barely hiding the fact that he thought he had already won. 2 uniformed police officers followed him, their faces unreadable. This wasn't just another intimidation tactic. Carter was playing dirty. "Mr. Reynolds," he called out, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "We need to have a word." I squared my shoulders, refusing to let him see that I was rattled. "If it's about your HOA's illegal harassment, my lawyer will be handling it." Carter let out a small chuckle, shaking his head as if I was some naive fool. "Oh, this isn't about the HO. This is about you." One of the officers stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, We received a report about an aggressive homeowner making threats against HOA board members. Mr. Carter has expressed concerns for his safety. My jaw dropped. Are you kidding me? Carter folded his arms, pretending to look concerned. Mr. Reynolds, your behavior has been escalating. First, you refuse to follow community guidelines, then you post defamatory statements online, and now, well, I had no choice but to involve the authorities. I could feel my blood boiling. This was a setup. Officer, I said, keeping my voice as level as possible. I have video proof of Carter and his team trespassing on my property. I have legal documents that show my house is not under HOA control. And now, after I expose them, they magically call you claiming I'm a threat. The officers exchanged glances. One of them spoke up, do you have this proof readily available? Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone, opening the footage of Carter's inspection where he tried to claim my yard as HOA property. I scrolled to the towing receipt, the fraudulent violation notices, and finally, the viral post that had thousands of comments calling out the HOA's corruption. The officers watched in silence. Then one of them turned to Carter. Sir, none of this matches the report you gave us. Carter's smug expression twitched. I took a step forward. You just tried to file a false police report to intimidate me. That's a crime, isn't it? The first officer turned back to Carter, his eyes narrowing. Sir, we take false reports very seriously. Are you sure you want to proceed with this complaint? Carter's face turned red. He clenched his jaw, realizing he had overplayed his hand. Finally, he forced a smile. I think this might have been a misunderstanding. I couldn't help but smirk. For the first time, he looked nervous. The officers gave him a final warning before walking back to their patrol car. Carter had just tried to use the police to scare me, and it backfired spectacularly. But the battle wasn't over. Because that night, something far worse happened. I thought I had won that round. Carter had been humiliated, his attempt to use the police backfiring right in his face. But I should have known better. Desperate people do desperate things. That night, I was jolted awake by the sound of metal scraping against pavement. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then, a loud thud. I shot out of bed and ran to the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. A tow truck. And it wasn't just any tow truck. It was parked in my driveway. I grabbed my phone and bolted outside, heart pounding in my chest. The truck's hook was already attached to my vehicle. They were trying to steal my truck again. Hey! I yelled, storming toward them. Get off my property. The driver barely flinched, looking back at me with zero concern. Just following HOA orders, he said, as if that was supposed to mean something. You can't tow a vehicle from private property, I snapped, pulling out my phone. I'm calling the cops. The driver hesitated. He glanced back at someone standing in the shadows. And that's when I saw him. James Carter. Standing just beyond the streetlight, arms crossed, watching. Like a damn vulture waiting for its prey to drop dead. You're making a mistake, Mr. Reynolds, he called out. Just let it go. Sign the HOA agreement, and all of this stops. I had never been more furious in my life. He was openly threatening me right in front of my house in the middle of the night. You have 5 seconds to get off my property, I said, stepping closer. Or you'll be explaining all of this to the police. The tow truck driver looked nervous now. Carter, however, just smiled. You don't want to go to war with me, Reynolds? You have no idea who you're dealing with? But I wasn't scared anymore. I was done playing defense. I raised my phone higher. Then let's make this official. You're trespassing. You ordered an illegal tow. You just threatened me on camera. For the first time, Carter's smirk faded. The tow truck driver suddenly let go of the controls, stepping back. I'm not getting paid enough for this, he muttered before hopping back into the truck and speeding away. Carter stood there, his face twisting with barely concealed rage. Big mistake, he hissed before disappearing into the darkness. And in that moment, I knew, this had just gotten personal. But what I didn't know, was that the HOA's next move would be their most dangerous one yet. I barely slept that night. Even after the tow truck was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. And I was right. The next morning, I walked outside, my mind still replaying Carter's threat from the night before. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw next. My house had been vandalized. Spray painted across my garage door in huge red letters was a single word. Delinquent. I froze, my fists clenching as rage boiled inside me. These cowards had come in the middle of the night and vandalized my home. My neighbors were already out, whispering among themselves. Some looked shocked. Others just shook their heads as if I had somehow brought this on myself. But that wasn't even the worst part. A small crowd of HOA members stood at the end of my driveway. Carter was right there in the middle, his arms crossed, smirking like he had just won a battle. "You've been officially marked as a problem homeowner, Mr. Reynolds," he called out loud enough for the entire street to hear. I turned to face him, my hands shaking, not with fear but with pure fury. "You think this is going to scare me?" I shouted. Carter shrugged. "I think it's going to make your life a lot harder. The neighborhood is losing patience with you. They want peace, order. And you? Well," he gestured to my garage. "You're just a delinquent now." I took a step toward him. "This is illegal, Carter. You know it. And when I prove it, you're going to regret every single thing you've done." He smiled, but for the first time I saw something else in his expression. Doubt. Because he knew I wasn't going to back down. And he was right. I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures of everything. The vandalism, the crowd, Carter's smug face. Then I made a call. "Hey, it's me. Yeah. I need that news crew here ASAP." Carter's smirk finally vanished. Because now, the whole world was about to see what this HOA was really doing. And their days of getting away with it were officially over. I had reached my breaking point. Enough was enough. By the time the local news crew arrived, my front yard was packed with neighbors, some curious, some whispering among themselves, and some, especially the HOA loyalists, visibly panicking. Good. Carter stood among them, arms crossed, his face tight with barely concealed rage. He knew what was happening. For the first time he was losing control. The reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Mr. Reynolds, can you explain to us what's happening here?" I didn't hesitate. I turned toward the cameras, holding up my phone. "I have proof that this HOA is illegally harassing homeowners. They vandalized my property. They tried to steal my vehicle, twice. They filed false police reports against me. And now they're trying to take my house under fake regulations." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the neighbors who had been ignoring the situation suddenly looked uneasy. I pointed directly at Carter. "This man is leading it all." Carter scoffed, stepping forward, his fake calm demeanor starting to crack. "That's a bold accusation, Mr. Reynolds. Do you have any real proof? Or is this just another stunt?" I smiled. "Oh, I have proof." I pulled out my laptop, turning it toward the news crew. Live on camera, I played the videos. Carter and his team trespassing on my property. The tow truck attempting to illegally take my truck, on camera. The false violation notices proven fake. The footage of my vandalized garage door, HOA members standing right there. Carter's smirk vanished. The reporter turned to him. "Mr. Carter, do you have a response to these allegations?" His face turned red. This is completely out of context." He turned to the crowd. "Mr. Reynolds has been disruptive, refusing to follow the community's rules. We were just enforcing order." A voice cut through the crowd. "Then why is my house getting the same treatment?" The entire street turned as another homeowner stepped forward, holding his own stack of HOA violation notices. Then another neighbor. And another. Suddenly it wasn't just about me. The HOA's corruption was being exposed, live on air. Carter knew it was over. His hands clenched into fists, his mouth opened and closed like he was searching for an escape. But there wasn't one. By the time the interview ended, the damage was done. The news station promised to investigate further. Social media was already exploding with the footage. And that night, HOA board members started resigning. One by one they distanced themselves from Carter. Because they knew what was coming next. A formal lawsuit. 3 weeks later, after my lawyer filed the case, the city launched an official investigation into the HOA. Carter? He was removed from his position, fined thousands of dollars for HOA fraud, and banned from ever holding another leadership role in any homeowners association. And as for my home? It remained mine. No fines. No liens. No harassment. I had one. And the HOA? They learned a lesson they'd never forget. Mess with the wrong homeowner and you'll pay the price.